Okay, so now let's discuss all of these modes one by one. First, let's consider the NAT mode for our discussion. So this NAT mode, this is the default mode of operation for FortiGate firewall, which means if you take a device out of the box with its default setting, you will find the FortiGate operating in NAT mode. So NAT mode is nothing but a device working as a layer 3 device, which is just like a router, and it is responsible for routing and traffic between two different network segments. If you consider this example, so this firewall is responsible to route the traffic between 1 into 168.0.0/24 and between 192.51.100.0/24. So you can consider this NAT mode devices as a normal L3 device. And where can we deploy these NAT mode devices? So you can deploy them on perimeter SD-WAN installations, or in perimeter or in SD-WAN setups where you need a FortiGate to perform any NAT in your traffic. Or if you want your FortiGate device to perform a routing, you can configure the device in NAT mode. Now, when you configure a device, or by default, since the device is in NAT mode, it is mandatory for all the interfaces to have an IP address. There are exceptions when you configure a device interface in a L2 mode, you don't need an IP address there. But if the interfaces are in L3 mode, then it is mandatory for all these interfaces to have an IP address. Now, when we perform NATing, the source address in this route mode will be the destination, and the destination MAC address will be the FortiGate interface IP address. So if any device on the network is performing sorry, so if the firewall is performing a destination NAT, uh, sorry, I missed that sentence. So the destination MAC will be the FortiGate's interface IP address when some other device is sending the traffic in NAT mode, and when the traffic leaves the firewall, the source address, that is the source MAC, will be the firewall's own interface MAC address. Now, this please keep this in mind, that because this will be the key differentiator between all these three modes. So in NAT mode, your source MAC will be your interface's own MAC. But when some other device in the network is trying to communicate with your device, then the destination MAC will be the destination MAC will be the firewall's interface MAC. So please keep this in mind, because this will get confused in vWare or transparent mode. Now let's consider the virtual wire mode. So virtual wire mode operates a bit different. And guys, if you have any question, please feel free to raise it on the chat. And if you want to talk, I will unmute you, and then we can discuss it there. So let's consider this as an example for virtual wire mode. So okay, there's a chat. Okay, Atish want me to explain the MAC address part once again. Okay, let me bring up the diagram. Okay. Okay, in this NAT mode, since the firewall is operating as an L3 device, so if when a traffic leaves the FortiGate firewall, the source MAC will be the firewall's interface MAC address. So let's make this point. Let's make it as a 2-point statement here. So the source MAC will be the firewall's interface MAC when the traffic leaves the firewall. And when some other L3 device is trying to send the traffic to the FortiGate firewall, the destination MAC will be the FortiGate's interface MAC address. So let me try if I can write it down here. So the first point is, uh, okay, source MAC will be firewall interface when traffic leaves the firewall. And the second point is, destination MAC will be firewall interface when traffic enters the firewall. Now, this is the same. This is the exact working procedure for all L3 device. But the reason why I'm trying to differentiate this is because this working procedure, this working will change for vWire and transparent mode. So to differentiate between these things, I'm making the statement now. The source MAC will be the firewall's interface MAC address when the traffic leaves the firewall, and the destination MAC will be the firewall's interface address when the firewall enters the firewall, when the traffic enters the firewall. Okay, perfect, Atish. So Vijay has a question. These modes are firewall modes or interface deployment modes? So Vijay, we will refer this as firewall modes. These are not interface deployment modes, but there is a catch when it comes to interface deployment. We will discuss this in vWire and transparent mode. Okay, now let's one moment. Okay, now let's discuss the vWire mode. So in vWire deployment, the FortiGate will be deployed between two different network segments. For example, you have an existing network segment which is running 200.0.113.2, and you have some other segment which is running your VLAN 1, VLAN 2, and your apps and service. Now, as per your typical three-layer architecture, there will be a switch distribution or access layer switch which should be placed in front of your servers, and that there'll be a trunk port running between your routers and your switch. Now, when you deploy a firewall in vWire mode or virtual wire mode, you are not altering anything in your network. You can directly plug in the trunk cables on the firewall, and firewall is deployed in vWire. You don't have to make any changes to your existing network. So it this when you deploy your firewalls in vWire mode, the firewall will not do any NAT, and it doesn't require you to perform any changes to your topology or your IP addressing schemes. Now, there is another condition for your firewalls to be in vWire mode, that you have to pair two interfaces, because the way the virtual wire works is like it's like two interfaces working in pair, where whatever traffic goes in will come out on the other side. For example, let's say if I have coupled port 1 and port 2, whatever traffic enters port 2 will always exit out of port 1. Similarly, whatever traffic that enters port 1, it will always exit out of port 2. So this is how the vWire works. So you don't have to do any additional configuration. You simply pair two interfaces in vWire mode, and whatever traffic that enters port 2 will leave on port 1, and whatever traffic that enters port 1, they will leave on port 2. No additional configuration required. Now, let's say the ports which I selected, for example, port 1 and port 2, if they are trunk ports, and I cannot allow this uncontrolled traffic flow through a firewall. That beats the purpose of firewall. The purpose of firewall is to have some control on the traffic, like what traffic to allow and what to deny. So in such scenario, when these ports are trunk ports, you can configure policies and you can restrict traffic based on the VLAN. Since these ports are going to act as a trunk port, definitely they are going to read the VLAN tags. So you can use those VLAN tags to restrict traffic, like what VLAN can traverse through the trunk or through the virtual wire, and what VLAN traffics to be blocked. This configuration can be done. And we have to be very careful when we deploy this vWire mode in L2 net setup. The reason being, uh, any L2 traffic like STP, LACP, they are all forwarded. So firewall is if you deploy a firewall in vWare mode, firewall will not participate in your trunking protocols STP or your layer 2 loop avoidance. So firewall will not perform any of those things. So all the traffic will be allowed through this beware mode. So we have to be very careful when we deploy ports in trunk between L2 networks. Okay, so I made a statement that this device deployed in vWare mode will not perform NATing. The reason why I made the statement is to make a NAT to function. Typically, you need an interface IP on the firewall. Now, when you deploy the firewalls in vWare mode, you are not going to configure any IP address in those interface. For example, in port 1 and port 2, you will not configure any IP address. But still, there is a way to enforce the NAT. So in vWare mode, there's an option to enforce NAT, and that is by using an IP pool. So instead of interface IP address, you can configure an IP pool, and using that pool, you can still perform NAT. But this will be only done in a setup where, because typically when you deploy vWare, you don't want to disturb your existing network. You just want the device to perform some monitoring and take action. So only if needed, you can perform NAT, and that is using an IP pool. So Aravind has a question, no policy can be configured to restrict the traffic. So Aravind, we can configure policies, but firewall will not rewrite anything on the traffic like a normal policy. So the agenda, the reason why vWare mode firewalls are deployed is only for a monitoring purpose, where you want to gauge your network. You want, let's say, you are running with Cisco ASA, and now you want to bring in FortiGate to your network. So to gauge your performance, how the firewall works, you will deploy the firewall in vWare mode to see if it was able to capture all the threat traffic in your network. So Ganesh Ram wants to repeat the vWare. So let me do that. So in vWare mode, you'll be deploying your FortiGate firewalls between two different network segments. So because of this vWare deployment, you will not make any changes to your existing network or your IP schemes. You just plug in you just pair two ports on the firewall, for example, port 1, port 2, and you will configure them on vWare, and you will put them in the network. So any traffic that enters one port will leave out of its pair. So if the traffic enters on port 2, it will leave port 1. Similarly, if whatever traffic enters on port 1, it will leave port 2. You don't need to do any routing especially for this vWare. Now, in this vWare deployment, let's say there are 30 ports on the firewall and you have configured 10 ports in vWare. You can still use the remaining 10 ports in normal operation for normal as a normal L3 port. So that is still possible for you. So Ganesham, you want any additional details, or is that okay? So Vijay, how many ports maximum can pair in vWare mode? In vWare, you can only pair 2 ports. So you can configure multiple vWare pairs. For example, you can configure P1, P2, then another pair which is P3, P4, and P5, P6. there is no restriction on how many ports you can pair, and as long as there's ports available. But in a pair, there can only be two ports. So Arvind got a question: with a policy using address objects, I can use which source address objects to be allowed or denied. Yes, so definitely, Aravind, you can do that because the functionality of the firewall has not changed. By deploying this firewall in vWire mode, definitely you can make the firewall inspect all the traffic and take action. For example, let's say this traffic from VLAN 2 is trying to connect to internet, and if you want to block that, you can write a rule on this firewall saying that any traffic coming from VLAN 2 going towards internet, you want to block it. You can still block it. What the firewall will do is it will inspect the traffic and it will silently drop the traffic. So it's not that firewall cannot take action on the packet. Firewall can take action on the packet depending on the rules which you write. So that is still possible, but that's not the main agenda for this vWire mode. The vWire mode is only mainly deployed to gauge your network, to gauge your firewall's performance. Now, then comes the last mode or third mode, that is transparent mode. One moment. So Arun has a question. In this case, we need to connect L3 device directly to firewall. Yes, because your firewall is not going to perform any routing here. So you need an L3 device to perform another set of routing for you. So let's discuss the transparent mode now. One moment. Okay, let me place it here. Okay, so if you remember, I mentioned that in vWire mode, you can configure 10 ports in vWire and then remaining 20 or 30 ports from the firewall as a normal L3 interface. That is possible in vWire mode. But when it comes to transparent mode, that is not possible. So basically, if you configure a firewall in transparent mode, all the ports behave like a L2 bridge. So every interface on the firewall start behaving as an L2 bridge, so you won't be able to differentiate between L2 and L3 interface. All the interface of the firewall will fall into the same L2 forwarding domain. So this can easily create a loop in your L2 network. So what we can do is to avoid this. Let's say you have a 40 interface, 40 interface, sorry, firewall with a 40 interface model. So in those interface, in those models, instead of using all 40 in same broadcast domain, what you can do is you can create VDOMs and assign maybe like 5 interfaces to this VDOM, and this 5 interface can be configured in transparent mode, so that your remaining ports are still available for you. Remaining ports are still available in a different VDOM to be used as a normal interface. So Arvind has a question. So there is no storm control. Arvind, the answer is no, because firewall is not in transparent mode. Firewall is not capable of participating in L2 protocols like spanning tree or trunking protocols. or any tracking protocols for that instance. So there is no storm control available. So again, the purpose of this transparent mode is where this device is not visible to any of your networks. So even, for example, if any servers from your VLAN 1 wants to communicate to internet, the destination MAC of this traffic will be the router's interface MAC. It will not be the firewall's interface MAC. So firewall interface MAC is not visible for these servers. So firewall will not participate in storm control if it is operating in transparent mode. Now, between transparent mode and virtual wire mode, it is the best practice is to go with vWire, because again the functionalities are similar, and the advantage which you get over the vWire is you will be able to perform NATing by using a IP pool. So this NATing using IP pool is not available in transparent mode. It is only available in vWire mode. So that's one advantage we have there. Now, since I jumped into this topic of VDOM, let's take a quick discussion on VDOM here. So Arvind has a question. I had performed transparent mode. I have noticed the LAN interface popped as red. So LAN interface, it doesn't have the capability to detect the loop and then make the interface status as red. So the interface status will come red either if the link is down or the duplex are not matching, and because of that the status is down. So only because of that reason the LED status will stay red, not because of a loop. Now, how to prevent loop in this kind of deployment? So loop prevention has to be done on the L3 and the L2 switches which we have in the network, not directly on the firewall. So for example, in the same setup, let's say in the same setup, if I have a switch over here and the router over here, if these two devices are participating in trunking, or if they're participating in STP, in that case, all the STP BPDUs are transparent to this firewall. So which means firewall will not block them and firewall will allow them. So the BPDU negotiations will happen between these two devices. So if there is any loop here, then obviously firewall is not going to detect it, but your switches and routers will detect. Now, since like let's say I have 5 interfaces in this VDOM, which is acting in transparent mode, and if I start connecting another switch segment on the same VDOM, then this is a chance where the loop will come in. Because any BPDU which we learn from this switch will also be forwarded here. But again, the switches are now capable enough to identify this, and then they will stop this loop. The firewall will not prevent the loop, but your switches will prevent the loop, even if the BPD user forwarded to another segment. Now let's take a quick discussion on VDOM. So what is VDOM? So Arvind has a question, is software switch option similar to transparent mode? Arvind, the answer is no. Software switch is different, where it can act as a virtual L2 switch. So if you're deploying an interface in software switch, it is capable of doing all switch functionalities like trunking or STP, but it's not the transparent. It's different. Okay, so let's discuss VDOM. So what is VDOM? VDOM is called as virtual domain. So it's practically splitting your firewall into multiple virtual firewall. So for example, basically, if you have 40 or let's say, um, yeah, 40 interfaces in your firewall, and all of them will by default will be in your root VDOM. So they are going to act as a one firewall. Now, by enabling this VDOM functionality, you can you can deploy 10 interfaces in VDOM 1 and another 15 interfaces in VDOM 2. You can maybe name your VDOM 1 as red and your VDOM 2 as orange. And remaining interfaces, you can leave it in the root. For example, let's say now I have used 25 interfaces here, and remaining 15 interfaces are left, which has not been assigned to VDOM 1 or VDOM 2. In that case, this remaining VDOMs will be available in your root. So root is the default VDOM which is available in the firewall. Now, what is the advantage of this? Now, if you remember, Uh, okay, let me bring up that diagram. One moment. So we discussed this in the previous class. Now let's say this is only for example. Let's say you are using a firewall model which is like 4200F or 4201F. This is fairly an advanced model. So you can use this single device, and you can segregate. You can use them in your perimeter level or your core layer, and also you can use the same firewall in your access layer. So how you can do is you can use 10 interfaces, or let's say another 5 interface in your you can assign them in a different VDOM. Let's say this is core VDOM. Now this 5 interfaces will be used in core VDOM, and maybe remaining 15 interfaces from your VDOM 2 can be used in your internal segmentation level. So same firewall can be used in different layers in your existing network. So this is possible by using this VDOM. Now, when it comes to physical firewall, we have additional advantages where you can have additional advantage. For example, if I want to communicate, if I want to communicate between Orange, I mean this VDOM 2 and your core VDOM, in firewall, there is a dedicated interface which is not in the front panel, but it is available on the backplane PCB. So which we call as NP links. So this NP links can be used to send any traffic between your VDOM 2 and your core VDOM. So what is the advantage of this? You are not limited, or you don't have to go through your entire access layer, distribution layer, and core layer switching, and then come back to another segment in your firewall. You can within your firewall you can traverse between two different networks. For example, on a single firewall, you can send all your traffic from internal segment to uh, core layer or next generation firewall without the help of any other L2 device or any of your distribution or core switch. Now this link is called NP links, and they are very powerful links. They have their own limitation, but they are very powerful links, and they can be used to send any traffic between these two different VDOMs if necessary. Now, but by deploying these firewalls in two different VDOMs, you have practically divided your single firewall into multiple virtual firewall. So you have divided your single physical firewall into multiple firewalls. Now, another advantage, or I won't say advantage, another option which is available in an L3 device, we cannot have overlapping subnets. So, for example, on a single VDOM or on a single firewall, you cannot have two different interfaces with the same IP address. But when it comes to VDOM, you can have an interface on different VDOMs with same IP address. For example, this can be 10.1 and this can also be 10.1. Since they are in two different VDOM, VDOM 1 and VDOM 2, since they are in two different VDOM, they are basically in two different L3 segments. So you won't feel the you won't see the IP clash. You can still use it. So Manikandan asked the question, what are the very general customer use case to have VDOM? So Um, I have seen maybe MSSP customers who lend a single firewall to multiple customers like ISPs. They will deploy VDOM, or even within your organization. Let's say you have your dedicated DMZ, your dedicated LAN segments, your Wi-Fi segments, your guest user segments, everyone segregated. So what you can do is you can use a single firewall and you can assign each VDOM to different uh, segments. For example, I let's say I can use my firewall. I can have one VDOM which I can say internet. So in internet, I will terminate all my ISP connections. Then I can have another VDOM, which is DMC, which will have all my servers. Then I can also have another VDOM, which will have my MPLS link or even cloud. So all your cloud connections will go over here. Then you have your VPN VDOM where all your VPN traffic will be terminated. Now again, this is only by design. If you want, instead of using four different firewalls, you can use a single firewall and split them in VDOM and make them act as different VDOMs. Now, another advantage is when creating admin users, you can restrict admin users to a specific VDOM. So, let's say maybe an admin team or NOC or SOC team who is responsible for cloud, they will only log into your cloud VDOM. They will not log into DMZ or your VPN VDOM. Your SOC team operating your working with your VPN, they will have only access to VPN. They don't have to log into DMZ or cloud. So this is also possible when you deploy firewalls in VDOM. So Arvind wants me to explain the NP link once again. So Arvind, in this case, okay, Manikandan also has the follow-up question, how to control inter VDOM communication. So I will answer Manikandan and Karthik and Arvind's question in a single go. So I will explain NP link once again and how to control inter VDOM communication. So let's consider this example where we have four VDOMs: Internet, VPN, DMC, and Cloud. We have four different VDOMs. Now let's say there's a I have maybe port 1 to 5 on this. Okay, let's place our internet here. Let's say I have 1 to 5 here, 6 to 10, 11 to 15, and 16 to 20. So these are the port allocations in different VDOMs. So any traffic that is coming in my DMC, if it has to access the internet, now I don't have any internet access in my DMZ VDOM. DMZ is not connected to my ISP link, but I still want to provide servers in my DMCs access to internet. So how can I do that? I need to fit the option. Since they are different firewalls, the option is to connect a physical cable from DMC VDOM to your internet VDOM. But this is not feasible because you have very limited ports. Since you have divided your ports into different for different VDOMs, you can't just use a physical port because you are restricted by the number of ports. So what we can do is in firewall, we have an option that is NP links or inter VDOM links. So this inter VDOM links can be configured between DMC and internet. So this will act like a point-to-point link. So any traffic that enters this link. Let's say let's name this as NP1 link. Okay, so any traffic that enters NP1 from the DMC side, it will leave the it will be exited on the internet side. So basically, it's a point-to-point link. You can't use this link to communicate to any other VDOM. So this link can only be used between DMC and internet. And in this interface, so now this interface will act as a destination interface in your DMC VDOM, and this will act as a source interface in your internet VDOM. So how to control the inter-VDOM communication? You can create a security policy in your DMC saying what traffic can enter the NP link, and you can also create another policy in your internet VDOM saying which traffic from your NP link can be accepted. And you can also terminate, for example, if needed, you can also terminate your VPN connection on your NP link, but that's not the best practice to follow, but you can still do that. You can also perform NATing on your NP link. So if you, because it has an interface IP address, using the interface IP address, you can still perform a NATing. If you want to run OSPF between the DMC and your internet, that is possible. You can use this NP link to run OSPF or BGP also. So what I'm saying is all your whatever configuration you do on your physical port, it is also possible in your. So whatever configuration you do in your physical interface, it's possible with your NP link also. And the advantage of NP link is a high performance. Okay, I hope I answered Arvind's question. And Manikantan, did I answer your questions? Okay, perfect. So with this, I think VDOM is clear for everyone. Now let's go back to the original discussion. Okay. So we have discussed two topics so far, the deployment modes of firewall and the VDOM concept. Now let's take a look at the initial configuration, how to set up the firewall initially and how to work with that. What are the caveats we have there? So Shanmugavel has a question, how is different from Palo? Uh, so I think this question is directed to Aravind. I'm not sure. Shanmugavel, please clarify. Okay, let's go back to our lab. Okay. So by default, when you take a physical firewall out of the box, it comes with a network segment pre-assigned. So let me show on this device. So since this is a VM device, there is no IP address pre-assigned here. So there are certain IP address like this 102255 segment, which we will discuss later. Now, when you access any physical firewall, It will have a management interface on the dedicated management interface on the device. So this dedicated management will come with an IP address. So it will come with an IP address 192.168.1.99/24. So this will be your IP address on your dedicated management. Now, this dedicated management is only available on your high-end and mid-range models. So how can we access the low-end models without dedicated management? So in low-end models, this will be either port 1 or internal interface. Some models have an interface tagged as internal. So we can use that internal or port 1 interface, and they will also have the same address 192.168.1.99, and you can use this for your management. Now, another thing is this port 1 and this management, they will act as a DHCP server by default. So if you want to take access, just configure your PC in DHCP client mode and directly to this port 1 or management interface, and you will get an IP assigned from the firewall. And using that, you can directly take access to your firewall. And what are the access allowed by default? So by default, you have ping, HTTPS, and SSH being allowed in these ports. So additional protocols, if we need, we have to enable. So, but by default, only these three protocols are allowed. And again, the default password will be admin, and the username will be blank. So you don't have to mention any password, but once you log in, firewall will prompt to reset your password. So this is a mandatory step. Every firewall on the initial setup will prompt you to reset your password. So you have to do this operation when you initially log in. And how to get CLI access to your firewall. So CLI can be using console. I mean dedicated console, and then using your putty or Teraterm. Any emulator tools which will communicate on SSH. And then on the GUI, we have a console called JConsole or Java console. So this will be available only once you log into the firewall using GUI. So from your GUI, you can access this Java console. Okay, did I miss anything here? Okay, now you will not see this firewall acting as a DHCP server in our VM environment. So in VM, you also have some different IP address. So if you consider this 127 IP address in your root interface, this and your 127 in your VSys HA and VSys FGFM, these are not for your external communication. These IP addresses are only used for its in firewall's internal communication. And again, this 10.255.1.1, this is available only in FortiLink. This is the default IP address. We can change it, and this FortiLink is nothing but a link which you can use for different purpose when it comes to FortiSwitch deployment. So if you are using FortiSwitch and FortiAP everything, then you can use the FortiLink interface for that purpose. So, Aravind, we will come to the VDOM in our lab. Please allow me some minute. Now, let's try to access our firewall. One moment. Okay, let me turn this PC on. So in our setup, we have this network element which is connecting to internet, and then I have the perimeter firewall which is connected to L2 switch and then to a PC. So from this PC, let's try to access the firewall. But if you see here on the firewall, there is no other interface configured. Let's verify. I think this got timed out. Let me open another SSH. Okay. And also in our lab, the default credential is admin and test at the rate of 123. So in the lab, we have set the device for license. License has been imported. So that should work for you. Okay, so we have imported the license, but you see the license status is still warning. So this is because the firewall doesn't have access to internet. So if I ping 8.8, firewall don't have access to internet, and because of this reason, firewall is not able to validate the license, and that is the reason why we see the status as warning here. So now Arav has a question. Arav, I will come back to this question. Allow me a minute. Now, in order to get internet access, I have to configure this port 2. Now, this port 2 is set as the network element in our lab is set as a DHCP server. So I have to configure the port 2 as DHCP client so that firewall will get an IP address on its port 2. So how can we do that? So we have to move into config system interface, or is it better if I show this in GUI? It'll be easy for everyone. So because CLI had to take notes of all the commands. So let me configure this LAN segment so that I can access the firewall on GUI from this PC. So config system interface, edit port 1. So let's see as I said, so the port 1 is by default set to DHCP mode, but it doesn't have any IP address. So but in case of physical firewalls, you will have a segment assigned on this port 1, which you'll be using. So let me change the mode, set mode static, and let me set the IP address that is 192.168.1.1 and the subnet mask. And once I hit end, my configuration will be applied, and I have enabled ping, HTTPS, SSH, and HTTP on this interface. So let's try to access. So before that, I have to configure the IP address on this PC. One moment. Okay, it has been configured with 1.254 and there is no gateway set. Gateway I can set, but it's okay. It will still work. Let's say dot one. So I can reach my firewall on ICMP. So let's try to access 1.1. Now, since while performing the importing the license, we also change the password. That is the reason why it's not prompting for a password to you. But if you on initial setup, it will ask us to change the password because the initial password is blank. Now on port 1, we have this IP address and the segment, but if you see the port 2 is empty. So let's configure this port 2 as DHCP, and so that it can get IP address. I'm only enabling ping here. So this is the Java console which I refer to. So once you log into the GUI, you have this Java CLI console option. So it can also function as a normal CLI. So if you see now port 2 has got the IP address 172.16.1.115. And if I ping 8.8, I'll be able to reach. So now let's check the license status, get system status, and the license is valid now. So again, end of the session, I will discuss how this license validation will happen. I mean, how this FortiGate communication will happen. But now let's focus on other topic. Now, this initial interface, initial firewall access is clear for everyone, I believe. Now let's discuss on the interface modes. So there are two ways you can assign IP address to your firewall interface. One is by manually assigning the IP address. That is what we have done on port 1. And the second method is by using a DHCP server or a triple POE link. So if you have a triple POE server, that can also assign IP address to the firewall. So we can make use of that. Now, in this case, port 2 has been configured as a DHCP client. So we have configured this as DHCP client, and we have got the IP address from our DHCP server. Now let's take another interface. Now, what other things we can configure? So this alias is nothing but naming which you are going to give for your identification. And then the VRF ID, by default, the VRF ID is 0. But if you enable VRF, you will have to assign different VRF ID. Now, the VRF is not the same as VDOM. VRF is only for the routing table, but VDOM is for the entire firewall. Now, when it comes to interface role, you have 4 roles. One is LAN, WAN, DMC, and undefined. So, what is interface role? So, let's say I choose the interface role as WAN. Certain new options are visible for me in the GUI, and certain options are not visible. So, which option is not visible? For example, since now I have the interface role as WAN, I don't have an option to configure this interface as DHCP server here because we don't want to configure the WAN interface as DHCP server. WAN interface can be a DHCP client, but we don't want it as a DHCP server. If I configure the WAN interface as DHCP server, then we will face a network outage. So for that reason, the DHCP server usage on the WAN has been restricted. But if I choose undefined, all options will be available. Now you can see I have this option to use DHCP server. Similarly, what other option is not available for me? That is security mode. So security mode is nothing but a device identification feature available in FortiGate, which can identify all the devices that is traversing through the network. So you don't want to identify the device names or the hardware models, like what Windows server or what Linux server you're using, or what is the end client. You don't want the firewall to learn all the Android tablets or Android phones and iPhones in the network, in the internet. So for that purpose, this device identification has been disabled on the WAN. But if you choose LAN, the same option will be available for you. So device detection is available for you. So once this option is enabled, so firewall will try to identify all the physical devices in your network. Now we can use this for to create policies. That's another topic, but this is available. So basically, by this will identify all the devices that is available in the network. There are 53 methods, 53 ways the firewall will use to identify the devices. Uh, I don't remember everything top of my head, but it can either identify your device based on MAC, based on the TCP sequence number it is using. Um, there are a lot of methods. If I can share those information in one of the class, I will share that with you when we discuss this topic in detail. Similarly, security mode, this is not available in WAN. This is available only in LAN. Once we enable security mode, you have this option to enable captive portal. So basically, you can perform active authentication on your users. We will discuss this in detail during our authentication topic. Now, let's say there is a corner case. I have my interface assigned as WAN, but I still want to use DHCP server in my WAN interface. So that option will still be available from the CLI, but not from the GUI. So I hope this interface role is clear. And then comes the dedicated management port. So if I enable this option dedicated management port, then this interface can only be used to access the firewall, and this interface will be used by firewall to communicate to external resources. For example, your LDAP service or your radius service. If firewall wants to communicate to the radius server, it can use this dedicated management port. So that's the functionality of this. And you get the option to configure trusted host. So trusted host is nothing but a way to configure or allow only certain IPs to communicate to the firewall. Uh, For if let's say if I configure 10.1.1.1/32, only this IP address is allowed to communicate to the firewall. Not, I mean, only if the traffic comes from this IP address. If the source IP is 10.1.1.1, firewall will accept the connection. If the source IP is something else, firewall will not accept the connection. So we have to be very careful when we enable this option, because if we forget the IP address, or if we try to come from a different network, you will not get access to firewall. So this is an important function. We don't want to get locked out of our own firewall. So please keep this in mind. And in terms of IP assignment, we have manual DHCP and PPPoE. We also have a one-arm sniffer. This again, one-arm sniffer, you will not assign any IP address to the firewall interface, but you can configure this, and firewall will basically log all the traffic that is coming through this interface. It's for a different functionality. And you can also configure secondary IP address. And in secondary IP address, you can have multiple IP addresses. It's not restricted to one or two. You can have multiple IP address. Let's say this is 10.1.1/. You can still configure another IP address from a totally different segment on the same interface. So it is possible. Now, in terms of let's apply this setting, and let's take a look how the routing will looks like. You see, port 3 now has two different IP addresses, and both of them came as a connected route. So one is 10.1.1.0 and another is 20.1.1.0. So whatever IP address you configure as secondary IP address, they will also come as a connected route on the same physical port. Now, let's say I have configured this on port 3. Now my port 3 on the other end On the firewall, I have port 1, which is configured in 10.0.0.1 and 20.0.0.1. Now, whatever device I have on the other side, maybe a router, it is only, maybe it might be configured with 10.0.0.2. Maybe it only has one IP address, but then who will connect to this 20.0.0.1? So you can have another router which comes with 20.0.0.2, and you can put a switch in between, and you can connect this switch, and from the switch you will make this traffic flow through the same link. So using the same interface, it will come to port 1. Still, sorry, on port 3 on this firewall. Still, port 3 will accept the connection coming from 10.0.0.0, and at the same time 20.0.0.2. Again, this is not something which you deploy in your production setup very often. It is only in certain corner cases. If you want to use this, you can use this option. So secondary IP is also possible in the firewall interface. Now, similarly, DHCP server. So DHCP server by default, it takes an IP address from the IP address which is in our primary, or the primary IP address. So it takes an IP address from that pool. Now, I have configured the pool as the primary as /30. That is the reason the DHCP took the remaining one IP from the pool, that is .2, to be assigned as a DHCP client IP address, because you don't want to assign IP address from a completely different segment in your LAN. I mean, that is still possible. You can still configure 31.1 to 31. Sorry. Okay, you can still make this possible, but only thing is you have to assign this as a secondary IP address in the firewall, because the firewall interface have to act as a one moment, 21.1.1. It should be able to accept this. So in certain deployments, you need the IP address to be in a different coming from different segment. It is possible. I don't know. It should be possible, but now it's not accepting. So you can also have the firewall to assign IP address. One moment. Okay, it's performing a check and asking us to do an IP address from the same segment. So whatever IP address segment which we assign in our primary address, the same can be used in our DHCP. I remember doing this somewhere with a different range. I had to check that. And then you can again use this to specify gateway or your DNS service. And at the same time, uh, from CLI, you can also use different DHCP options. From GUI, your options are restricted, but from CLI, you can use additional options, like, for example, option 53, if I remember correctly, of the DHCP code. that can be used to even assign FortiManager manager IP addresses to a different firewall. So you can configure this firewall as a DHCP server where another firewall will connect, and you can have another firewall to get fetch the FortiManager manager IP address using this DHCP server. That is also possible. And then we have the option to configure this as relay if needed. When we configure this for relay, one moment. When we configure this for again relay, we have to specify another DHCP server, and then if this firewall is going to act as a server, you can specify what type of interface the request will come in on your IPsec interface or on your regular L3 interface. Then you can control your wireless controllers, and then additional DHCP options which we can configure. So hexadecimal, I think 0x 53. I don't remember the code. You can use that for different functionalities. So all this is available for us as a DHCP server. Similarly, we can also create a rule saying which IP should go to which MAC address. So we can have that static binding as well. Then the device detection, which we discussed earlier. So it's to identify what device we come from the network. So this is basically to identify what kind of hardware we have. Let's say your network is entirely has only Windows PCs, and out of the sudden, if you see a Linux PC in your network, then from security standpoint, you can take a look like to identify what the device is. Now, traffic shaping is possible on the egress. So you can also configure outbound shapings directly on the interface. You can have the In FortiGate firewall, you have the option to configure traffic shaping in two places. One is through a policy, and the other is through an interface. So you have to create a traffic shaping profile and then apply it on the interface directly, or you can create a shaping policy, which will be available under policies traffic shaping. Yes. So this is also feasible for us. So this is a basic interface configuration which we can do. And then comes the VLAN. Now, all the interfaces which we see here, they are only physical interface. None of them are virtual. So how will I create a loopback or another interface? So that can be created from here. So this is the vWire pair which we discussed earlier. So virtual wire pair, you just enable this and assign two interface to it, port 5, 6. Now this will become a vWire pair. Whatever traffic that goes in port 5 will leave on port 6. You can also configure VLANs for VLAN filtering. Now, when it comes to interface, now we are trying to create a new interface on the firewall. Let's see what are the options we have. We have an option to create aggregate interface, VLAN interface, loopback, triple PoE, redundant interface, software switch, again, which is a virtual switch on the firewall. So once you create software switch, you have to assign multiple physical interfaces to it. Then your SSL VPN channel interface, then VLAN and Wi-Fi SSID, which these are the interface types which we can create from the on the firewall. So if I create type VLAN, I get to choose the physical interface, which will be an L2 interface where the actual traffic will come in, and then I can choose the VLAN ID, and the role can also be assigned. So rest of the settings will be the same as a normal L3 interface. There is no much difference, but we have this option, and you can also choose the VLAN protocol 802.1q or 1AD, and then I can also create loopback interface on the firewall using the same option. So this is how we create different interfaces on the firewall. Now, another important option is the static gateway. So at the moment, if you see, there is no static routes on the firewall. Let me check from the GUI, sorry, from the CLI. Do we have any route? So we have four connected routes coming from the interface, and then there is one static route. Now, where did this static route came from? So this static route is not something which we configure on the GUI. On the GUI, I don't see any route, but still on the CLI, I see one static route. So if you notice, the static route has an AD value of 5, so it is not a manual static route, which is something created. Manual static routes will have an AD of 10. So 5, it suggests that this came from a DHCP. Now, if you see a static route with AD 15, that suggests that it came from VPN interface. So there are various classes which we will discuss during our routing session in detail. Now, the basics, we need a static route for your fire traffic to reach out to internet. So a static default route. So that route has been injected through our DHCP server. Creating a static route is a straightforward configuration. We will come back to this topic in detail when we discuss our routing concepts. Okay, now let's discuss another topic, which is admin user creations. So under user and authentication, no, this is for the firewall users, system and administrator. Under system and administrator, we get the option to choose different admin profiles. So we can have a normal administrator or API admin and then SSO admin. So we will discuss the normal administrator creation now. So under normal administrator, so you can have them as a local user or match a user to a remote server. So a remote server is something where you will have your users in your LDAP or radius, and then you will use the same users to authenticate to your firewall, same usernames to authenticate to your firewall. So in local users, it's straightforward configuration. You will create the usernames and the password. So I will use the same test 123. And then while choosing the admin profile, this is where the play comes in. So you can assign different admin profiles, and each admin profile will have different privileges. So let's take a look at the privileges now. So you have your super admin. If you check, which is the default read-only profile, so basically it provides access to everything in the firewall because it's a super user admin. At the same time, if you check proof admin, it also has access to everything by default, but where we can, but diagnostics has been disabled. So from your CLI, you have disabled any diagnostics commands. And at the same time, now you can restrict this proof admin to a specific VDOM. When you, let's say, when you create administrator, if you choose proof admin, there's a way to restrict to a specific VDOM. Okay, okay, it will come only if we enable VDOM. Okay. So, okay, what I wanted to say is, where can I use super admin? I can use it where for a user where I have used provide all the access. But where can we use proof admin? Proof admin can mainly be used in places where you have VDOMs enabled and you want a certain admin to have access only to a specific VDOM. Other than this, we can also create our own profiles where you can either restrict access to a specific feature, you can provide read access, or you can provide read and write access. And When it comes to firewall, we also have this custom option, and one moment. So when we say custom, we get additional options where you can allow them to either what to do with the configuration, read or write access, then what to do with the report, threat weight. Those sub configuration subcategories will also get an access level. So we can configure this. Similarly for networking, if you want to allow them to do a packet capture or allow them access to the router configuration, then you can create specific profiles based on this and then provide them access. And there is this override idle timeout. So by default, after 5 minutes, the idle timeout will kick in. If the access is idle for 5 minutes, it will log us out. And when it logs us out, we have to log in back again, re-authenticate. So this can be configured, customized for specific profiles. We can either say never timeout, or you can configure a timeout value. If you don't configure this, let's say this idle timeout is not configured, then it will take a setting. It will take whatever value we have configured under system settings, and then we have a timeout value here, idle timeout. So whatever value we configure here, this value will be enforced for all the admins. Now, since we are on this setting page, let's take a quick look. So on the device setting, by default, the host name we can change here. For VMs, it will be the VM serial number, but for physical models, it will be the hardware model number, which will be the default host name. We can customize it. And then we have our time settings. So currently, this firewall is configured to get the time information from NTP, and the NTP server is FortiGuard. So Fortinet maintains its own servers, which there are a lot of servers maintained by Fortinet, and commonly they are all referred as FortiGuard servers, which is where all the updates for the Fortinet is being received. So this FortiGuard can also provide NTP information, so which will be received by the firewall. Now, if you want to configure the firewall as an NTP server, you can also configure a specific interface, and firewall will start acting as an NTP server in that interface. And similarly, the HTTP access, by default, it's on port 80, and redirect to HTTPS is enabled. So even if you try to access the firewall on HTTP, it will redirect us to port 80. So let me check HTTP 8.1.1. It will redirect us to HTTPS. So this is because we have this setting enabled, and it is a best practice. You don't want to allow HTTP access to your firewall. And we can also customize this port. Let's say I configured this as 8080. Let me disable this option. Okay, now let's try this. Now if I do HTTP 192.168.1.1, I will not get access. I should not get access. Why? New incognito. So now I'm not getting the access because I am trying on HTTP port 80. But if you check the configuration, HTTP is configured on port 8080. So this access will not work. Now if I add the port details, 8080, now I should be able to access the firewall. So this is very important. If you're exposing your firewall on the WAN interface, if you enable HTTPS GUI access on your WAN interface, you should enable this. You should customize this port. Instead of 443, you can run it on 4443. Whatever port you want, you can run it. But still, it doesn't mean like just by doing this, a firewall will be secure, because if anyone does port scanning, they can definitely identify the firewall. So, but it is good to change the default port number and then use it. And then we get the option to choose our certificate. So you see, when we access the firewall, we got this message not secure. This is because the certificate is signed by Fortinet. I mean, the firewall is the CA. This firewall is acting as a CA for its own certificate, and which is not being trusted by my browser. That is the reason why it displays this not secure option. Now, this can be annoying, or this maybe your compliance policies in your organization wants you to have this removed, or you want to use your own certificate. So what you can do is you can generate a CSR from the firewall, get it signed by your own CA, and then import it and then use it here. So whatever certificate you use here, the certificate will be given to you when you try to authenticate. You can also change your SSH and telnet ports idle timeout value. Acme, this is something related to certificate, not for us. And allow concurrent session. So this allow concurrent session, if it's enabled, I can access the firewall on multiple GUIs and also CLI at the same time. If I disable this option, I will be able to access the firewall one session at a time. It can be GUI, it can be CLI. So depending on your need, you can configure this. Then your SSO, this is fine. This is for Fabric on FortiCloud. If we have those accounts, we can configure it here. Then the password policy. By default, password policy is off, but you can enable it for admin. You can you can define like what should be the password length and what character, how to use complexity, everything you can define. Same for IPsec. So if you are using a dial-up channel, or if you are using um, a side-to-side channel, then in those situations you can use this. And then for both admin and IPsec, we can use this configuration. Workflow management. Workflow management is something related to configuration being saved and then being approved. So if you enable this option, and if your configuration get, this is a new feature in 7.4, is not available in 7.2, I believe. So if you lose your firewall access, let's say you are doing a configuration, and if you lose your firewall access, uh, then I think it reverts back after a certain time. I need to check this feature. This we will come back later. And then the language and theme, and this is the operation mode. So in the NGFW mode, or in your NAT mode, you have two operations. One is profile based and policy based. So this profile based and policy based is nothing, it has nothing to do with the modes which we discussed. But within the NAT mode, how are we going to inspect the traffic? This profile and policy base, we will come back when we discuss the UTM profiles. And in policy, and then again, we have the central SNAT mode. So if you enable central SNAT mode, then you get the option to choose um, configure your NAT policies separately. By default, in NAT mode, your security policies and NAT is combined. But if you use central SNAT, then this will be separated. You can manage your policies separately and NAT separately. So depending on the requirement, we can enable this. I believe one of you asked to include the central SNAT in our topic. So I will do this, and I will explain this in a dedicated session. So this is where we enable our VDOM. So once we enable VDOM, firewall will log out for a minute, and once we log in back, admin test at the rate of 123, you will see we landing in the root VDOM. So global VDOM, and from global we have a root VDOM, which is again the management VDOM. So if you see this red wheel, which indicates that this is a management VDOM. Global VDOM is nothing but where all your resources will be available. When I say all resources, currently we are in global VDOM, and we will see all our interfaces being present in our global VDOM. Now, even if you assign it to a different VDOM, if you want to take a look, so at the moment, all the interfaces are in root VDOM. Still, from global VDOM, you can take a look at the interface status. So this will come handy if you don't know which interface belongs to which VDOM. Now let's also another option I wanted to show here. Okay, now we have this option VDOM enabled. Now if you see here, we get to choose, we get to limit the usage. So first, we can choose whether it's a traffic VDOM or admin VDOM. So in admin VDOM, it's only for management access. Your traffic will not come in. If it's a traffic VDOM, you can again choose this VDOM to be work in profile based or policy based. We will come back to this later. And another important thing which I want to show is your resource usage. So how much session you want to allow in this VDOM, how much policy you want to allow. So globally on this model, you can configure 21,000 policies, 21,024 policies, out of which how much policy you want to allow for this particular VDOM, how much address objects you want to allow. All these values can be configured in under this setting, under the setting VDOM. Now, this doesn't allow you to configure how much CPU you want to restrict or how much memory you want to restrict. Only in terms of configuration, you can restrict what amount percentage of configuration you can allow based on the firewall resource. The reason why this is allowed only for this resource usage is allowed only for these objects is because firewall maintains a table. So I can show you that. Table size. So by default, every firewall model, depending on the FortiOS version which they are running, it has a predefined table value. Let's say FortiGate VM32 running 7.4. It has a set table value which says how much antivirus content type I can configure, how much antivirus profiles I can configure. And similarly, if you see, it also says how much multicast policy, how much GTP policies or firewall policies which we can configure. Everything will be defined, which are predefined values, because the reason why they are predefined is these are table entries which are stored on registries. So which is hard coded again in the FortiOS code. So these are some resources which we can divide, but CPU and memory on the other hand, they cannot be hard coded and they have to be used dynamically for better performance. For that reason, CPU and memory is not available for us to allocate, but all the other configuration settings, piece of configuration, we can allocate. And if you have another VDOM, let's say test, run to VDOM list page. So now I can have this VDOM created. Now this is not my management VDOM. Now if I want to configure my test as management VDOM, again I can simply switch my VDOM and that will be good. Now these are the default interfaces which will get assigned, because now this test VDOM is acting as a separate firewall. So it has its own NAT interface, L2 interface, and SSL VPN interface. Same interface is also available in your root VDOM. If you can see here, the same set of interface is also available in your root VDOM as well. Now, how to assign interface to this test VDOM? So this can be done from our from global VDOM, under global VDOM and interface. Let's say port 6. I can choose here. So earlier this option is not available for us. Now from here we can choose a different VDOM. So I can assign port 6 to test VDOM and we are good to go. Now if you see, port 6 is in your test VDOM. All the other interfaces are in your root VDOM. Same can be verified from your VDOM page. I think this part is clear now. Okay, another thing, access protocols. So on the interface, if you see, there are certain access protocols which are available for us. HTTPS, ping, SSH, SNMP. These are something which is very familiar for us. But what is this FMG access? So this is FortiManager access. So FortiManager is nothing but it is similar to Panorama of your one moment. Okay, so FortiManager is similar to Panorama of Palo Alto. So it's a management device where you can manage thousands of you can manage the configuration of thousands of devices. So for the device to for the FortiGate to get connected to FortiManager, or for the FortiManager to send configuration to this firewall, we have to enable this option. Only if we enable this option, this FGFM protocol, that's a proprietary protocol of Fortinet. So FGFM will get enabled on the interface. Once this protocol is enabled, this firewall can be managed from FortiManager if the appropriate configuration is in place. Now, what about FTM? This is FortiToken Mobile. So if you want to allow FortiToken Mobile push notifications on this interface, then you can use this. So FortiToken is it's similar to hardware tokens. So instead of hardware, now we can also use our mobile. I'm sure you're familiar with Google Authenticator or a Microsoft Authenticator. So similar kind of tool. So which can be used to generate dynamic OTPs to log into the firewall. Again, depending on your auth setting, we can do that. Then radius accounting, we know this is for radius protocol, and then the security fabric connection. So again, security fabric again is a proprietary technology from Fortinet. So once we enable this CapWap and Fortinet telemetry will get enabled. So using this, they can identify devices and they can form a topology. Let me see if there's any topology being created. So currently, this is the topology. This firewall connects to internet. Now, if there are multiple other devices and if they are being identified, everything will be listed here. Again, we have a separate class designed for this. So during which we will discuss this security fabric. And the last protocol under interface is speed test. So speed test is nothing but if you enable this interface for speed test, you can you are basically enabling this interface as a IPOF server. So FortiGate has a inbuilt IPOF server capability. So if you want to make the firewall work as an IPOF server, that is possible. You can also make the firewall work as IPF client. You can run speed test between two different interfaces on the local firewall. You can also run speed test. You can also make the firewall connect to FortiGuard. FortiGuard has their own IPF servers listed, so firewall can connect with them and perform IPF testing. So this will get helpful when you do when if you suspect firewall is causing slowness in a network, then you can do the speed test on the firewall. This will help us narrow down the issue to ISP or the firewall causing it. Okay, now the other topics, how to take config backup on the firewall. So config backup can be taken from here. So just click on your admin username and then you get the option to config backup and restore. So you can take backup, click on backup, it will redirect you to this page. You can take backup of your entire setting, global, or you can take backup of specific VDOM, root or test, let's say test. Now you can configure it to local PC or USB disk. USB disk is not available on this VM model, but certain physical hardware models have USB disk. So you can save your backups to your USB disk if needed. And then at what file format you want it. You want them in FortiOS format or YAML format. So typically we go with FortiOS, but if we need a YAML, we can do that. Then password mask. So if you enable this option, all the passwords in the configuration file will be masked. So if you use this, let's say you take a config backup by enabling this password mask, and if you re-import that config to another firewall, you won't be able to use that. In places like your existing admin accounts will not work, your VPN channels will, anywhere you used password, it will not work. So it's only to share the file with your Fortinet support team, not for typical config backup. And you can also encrypt your configuration here. But when you encrypt, if you choose to encrypt, you should remember the password because the same password is needed when you restore your configuration. So when you restore your configuration, you get the option to use the password. So if you have set a password for encryption, you have to use the same password to decrypt your configuration. Now let's take a config backup and take a look what's in the config backup. So let's take for specific VDOM test. I'm not encrypting it. Click OK, and we get this file. So let me save this. So let's open this config backup. So the default format is CONF, and the first few lines, it says about the model which we are running. This is FortiGate VM KVM. So that is what we see here, and then the FortiOS code which we run and the build number. So if you can also run different, so this is kind of a GA build 2662. There will also be interim builds which you'll be able to get from Fortinet support on certain cases. So if you're running a different build, you will see a different build number here. For all GAs, you will see the GA build here. And then what is the operation mode? Mode 0 is NAT mode. Then your VDOM, how many VDOMs you have, and other than the root. And then, sorry, this is not talking about the number of VDOMs. This is talking about which VDOM. So VDOM 1, which belongs to test. So that is what it says here. And which user created a config backup. Then this config file version, which basically will have the time. No. Then the build number again says about the OS build, which is again here 2662. Then we have a global VDOM, which is VDOM 0, and this configuration is taken for VDOM test. So this doesn't have all the configuration. If you see earlier, we assigned to port 6 to VDOM test. So we see that configuration, and the rest, all the common configurations will be available here. Anything that is common, which will be available. Now let's take one more config backup for the normal global and let's compare it. So FortiOS. So let's save. Let's take a look. You see the size difference. Okay, so now this is a normal VDOM. This is normal backup taken for all the VDOM. Operation mode NAT. Again, VDOM taken under user admin. And if you see here, the global VDOM is 1. And now you will see this piece of configuration. Since you have taken a global config backup, you will see this piece of configuration which talks about all the VDOMs available on this firewall. So we have root VDOM and we have test VDOM. Then we have this global setting. This global setting is not available on the previous config backup. So this is the config backup taken for test VDOM. There is no global setting, because a global setting is something which is applicable for the entire firewall, not for a specific VDOM. So that is the reason why it is not available in the config backup taken only on test VDOM, but it is available on the global VDOM. Similarly, the admin profile. So these are the admin profiles, proof admin and super admin. This will not be available in your this test. Yes, this is not available in your test VDOM. Again, if you see here, the admin, there is no admin being configured. That is because we haven't created any admin on that particular test VDOM. But once we create the profile, the user, the admin profiles and the admin names will be available here. Other than this, all the other config will mostly be the common configuration, which is shared between all the VDOMs. Any specific policy which you create on specific VDOMs will be available on those VDOMs. Now, another information which I want to show here. Uh, Config firewall. Okay, so in terms of routing, you will see two set of configuration. So what I want to show is like currently we have don't have any policy, so that's why I'm not able to show it on this config file. So you will see the config files, the routes, configuration, everything for this VDOMs in the order. So your configuration is kind of split into two setups. So okay, let's check this. Does this have port 6? Let me check. Port 3. Okay, port 6 is included here. Uh, if you see the if there is security policy configured, you will see the policies being mentioned twice in the configuration. If there are two VDOMs configured, I won't be able to show it now, but it's fine. In some other class, we will also check that. So this is how we take the config backup. This is clear. Now let's discuss how to upgrade your firewall. So firewall upgrade can be performed from your system and your firmware and registration. So under this option, under here you have the option to upgrade. So by default, if the FortiGate is connected to your FortiGuard, then firewall will be able to fetch the firmware versions which is available. So if there is a new firmware available, you will be able to see the information here. So this fabric upgrade is an option which is available, and using this, you can upgrade all your devices in your fabric. If you have multiple devices set up in fabric, you'll be able to upgrade them from your root device. We will discuss this in another class when we discuss the security fabric. But now if I want to upgrade this, currently this firmware is in 7.4, 7.4.4 and 7.4.5 is also available. So I just need to click on upgrade and it will give me the option whether I want to go to 7.4.5. That's the only option available for me now. If there is 7.4.6 available, it will also be listed here. And then 7.6. 7.6 is the next version. So if I want to upgrade to 7.6, I can also do that. Similarly, downgrade. If I want to downgrade to 7.2 or 7.0.6.4, those will be available here. Now, let's say if I choose to upgrade using this, if I click on this, firewall will take a config backup, and then firewall will download the firmware from FortiGuard, and then it will go for an upgrade. Now, let's say your firewall is deployed in a isolated environment where it doesn't have internet access. So in that case, we have two options available. One is by deploying a FortiManager, which can also act as a FortiGuard server, and the FortiManager can provide all the firmware information to your firewall. That is one way you can upgrade your firewall. And another option is to manually upload the firmware image. So you can download the firmware image from the support portal and then you can upload it directly to your firewall. When you do this manual upload, we have to be very careful about the build number. For example, let me show you that FortiGate. You need to identify the firmware upgrade path first. For example, let's say VM 40OS, and currently we are in KVM. So KVM. Let's say I am running, for example, let's consider that I am running my firewall in 7.2.4 and I want to upgrade to 7.4.4. So I'm going from 7.2 to 7.4. So I need to identify what is my upgrade path first. So this so if I want to upgrade from 7.2.4 to 7.4.4, I have to go through 4 upgrades. So first I have to, this will be the version which I am running. Then I have to download and install 741 build number 2463. So this build number is very important. So because when you upload your firmware image here, and if you choose the wrong build number, then the firewall will not function as per your expectation. During upgrade, if you miss any of this build, or if you don't follow this upgrade path, you can end up corrupting your FortiOS image. If you end up in such a situation, then you have to flash format your firewall, and then you have to install the image using TFTP server, and then you have to do the configuration. There are cases where you will end up doing all the configuration once again from the beginning, because your configuration will be in a different version and the image which you install, TFTP install, can end up in a different version. So we have to be very careful when we do an upgrade. When we jump between multiple versions, we should be very careful about the build numbers. So always verify the build number from the upgrade tool, and then choose the upgrade path. So this is an option available for upgrade. Now, in terms of license registration, all the licenses that is available once the firewall gets connected to FortiGuard, it will be listed under your license page. So whatever license you hold, it will be available here. And once a specific feature is licensed, firewall will be able to get the updates for all of that from the FortiGuard server. For example, in this case, uh, the antivirus has been licensed. So because of that, we are getting the antivirus version updates. Now, AI malware detection is not licensed. Because of that, we are not getting this particular update. In other terms, if some of you might be familiar with Palo Alto, so in Palo terms, these are the content updates. So depending on the license which we have, this will be available. Now, we will discuss this in another class where we will troubleshoot FortiGuard connections. So at that time, we will discuss this in detail. But this is where all the licensing will come in. Now I will leave the floor to questions. So if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. So I will. Okay, now you can unmute yourself and you can ask the questions. I will stop the recording also.